Actually ties right into what I've been talking about for the last couple of years, and that is that I've used this analogy of the Highlander analogy, right, where you've got these two big immortals. You've got gold and you've got the dollar, and eventually they're going to have a battle, and eventually gold's going to win. But before we get to that battle, a lot of smaller battles are going to take place. And my point has been that until that final battle takes place, the dollar is going to run around the world and cut the head off of all these other currencies. Well, the swap lines is like the sword that the Kurgan, the big bad guy that runs around and he uses. I have always said that the dollar will be weaponized. They've weaponized the dollar in the past, but now it's really become clear to me that it's going to be weaponized because they have extended swap lines over the last month to certain countries and not extended it to other countries.
And maybe we should really explain, the whole point of this interview is to get an inner glimpse of how Brent and I talk to each other. And, we talk multiple times daily, on weekends, nights, all sorts of times. But explain what is a swap line and why it's getting zero attention anywhere. And it's like one of the most important aspects.
It is one of the most. So, well, let's take a step back from there. The reason they're important, and part of the reason that I have been so bullish the dollar, is the dollar debt in the world. So everybody talks about the 24 or 25 trillion that the US owes in dollar debt, and that's a big problem. But the real problem, the problem that has shown up in the last, call it 3 to 4 months, is the dollar debt that the rest of the world owed. And not just the dollar debt, but the ongoing funding needs, because a lot of these companies outside the United States still fund their ongoing daily businesses via dollars or euro dollars. Dollars located outside the United States are called euro dollars. And so whether you like the dollar, whether you hate the dollar, whether you think it's a good currency or a bad currency, it just is the global reserve currency, and companies need it. And the reason that they have borrowed in dollars is they get a lower rate when they borrow in dollars than when they borrow in lira or reals or pesos or whatever it is. And so as this dollar shortage has intensified, and as the flow of capital has decreased, and as the velocity of money has fallen, those dollars have become harder to get. And it makes it harder for those companies in those non-US countries to get the dollars to service that dollar debt and to service those ongoing operations. And whereas the US government or the Fed can print, quote unquote, print dollars or offer dollar liquidity to the domestic market, the ECB cannot offer dollar liquidity to their market. India cannot offer dollar liquidity to their markets. Indonesia cannot offer dollar liquidity to their market because the US is the one that decides whether they're going to print dollars or not. The only way that you can print dollars outside the United States is further extension of credit. But when you get into a credit crunch and credit starts rolling in rather than being expanded, you get this credit crunch. So they've set up these swap lines. The Fed has set up swap lines with countries around the world in order the Fed will loan dollars to the ECB. The ECB will pledge euros as collateral. And then the ECB will go out to their countries and say, we have this amount of dollars, you need to bid on them, how many you need. And then Italy's central bank gets dollars from the ECB, and then they go to their companies that need it, and the companies bid on their allocation of dollars.
But so think about the geopolitical angle here. It's just wild. Like the loans, just so people know, the swap line loans are either in 7 days, so 1 week, or 84 days, which is 3 months. And they range anywhere from 0.3 if you're the Japanese. The Koreans, unfortunately, are paying a higher rate there. They paid as high as 1% during that loan. But let's think about Trump here. Let's really nail this down, because no mainstream media has talked about this angle where if you're Trump and you're sitting there going, wait a second, Powell has all this control with the swap lines. I want to internalize this because I could throw some geopolitical leverage. For example, an obvious one would be Airbus versus Boeing. Right?
That's a perfect one. We've talked about that on a couple occasions, right? It's a good example because it makes it people for understand. It'll happen in more things than this, but this is a good example. The last thing that Trump wants to see is Boeing to go out of business. A month ago, he even said, Boeing's a great company. It's a U.S. asset. We can't let it go bankrupt.
The national defense,
But, one of the ways to bring Boeing out of bankruptcy or out of their troubles and get them growing again is they've got to get new contracts, right? But who's their biggest competitor is Airbus. Well, Airbus is a French company. Trump, when he finds out, when he's making his case to bail out Boeing, and he finds out that Powell is bailing out the ECB, who is in turn bailing out France, who is in turn bailing out Airbus, he's going to say, wait a minute. Or he could say, wait a minute, I want some concessions on this or that.
And he's going to get it.
Or yeah, exactly. And if he pulls those swap lines, and listen, maybe he doesn't do it with the ECB right away, but if he could do it with Indonesia or he could do it with Brazil, maybe they have a new,
Mexico.
Yeah, let's forget about Boeing for a second. Let's pretend they want to, put forth some new foreign policy in the Middle East, right? And they want big buy-in from around the world. And Brazil says that we don't want to be any part of that. And he says, well, do you want the swap line, right? You actually saw this a week ago. Bolsonaro came out and backed his candidate, or not his candidate. The U.S. wants a different president in Venezuela, Guaido, right? And so, shortly after getting the swap line, Brazil came out in support of a new president being put in place in Venezuela. That's not a coincidence.
It's classic. Like, you're not going to see Russia getting a swap line. You're not going to see China getting a swap line.
Right.
The whole concept that, we can show the first chart here that you're looking at is the top 10 gold producers in the world.
Yep.
And when you look at it, you go, okay, this to me is the first of its kind in the world, but it's really signaling, what do you think is going to happen in non-swap line nations? Well, they're going to be influenced by non-American foreign policies.